In today's video, we're going to be discussing the future of three very important players amongst their NHL clubs. Are the Edmonton Oilers in any danger of losing Leon Draisaitl? He's eligible for an extension this summer, and some NHL insiders think he will not be quick to re-sign. We're also going to take a look at the future of Jacob Markstrom in Calgary, and is there a possibility Jake Guentzel, after completing the playoff run with the Hurricanes, returns to the Penguins? We'll discuss that, plus a prospect signing in Ottawa and some other roster moves as well, coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of news and some interesting rumors to take a look at for the future. Some important players amongst our NHL franchises. First, though, we do have some news around some injuries and some recalls around the NHL. The Ottawa Senators are getting prepared today to play the New Jersey Devils. They've had Zach Ostapchuk up with them for the past 5-6 games. He's been reassigned, and taking his place on the roster will be Angus Crookshank. Crookshank did have a bit of a stint earlier in the season where he was recalled and played relatively well, actually. So it's nice to see him get another opportunity here. So we'll see what he can do this time around. Ostapchuk had a good look and certainly performed well. Curious to see who else the Sens give an opportunity here amongst their prospect crew down the stretch, now that they know their playoff hopes are all but shattered. The Washington Capitals today also recalled Matthew Phillips, so he should be able to get back into the lineup. Of course, the Caps dealing with some injuries, and of course the Tom Wilson suspension. He was given a 6-game ban, of course, which we talked about in a video last night after the ruling came down. That's going to be a big blow to the Washington Capitals. They had quite a game with the Hurricanes yesterday. Last night they went to a 6-6 game, a wild overtime, followed by an extended shootout with finally the Capitals and Dylan Strome ending it. It was a crazy game, high scoring. If you like lots of goals, it was very entertaining. I'm sure from the Carolina standpoint, normally pretty tight defensive squad. I don't think Rod Brindamore probably enjoyed that game too much, but Washington has been surging, and of course, the first game without Wilson, they do get the W. So we'll see what Phillips can come up and help. The Montreal Canadiens announced an update on Joshua Waugh. Of course, we know he was injured, left the team on the road trip and went back home. We knew it was likely going to be an extended break, that he was going to be off. Now we know it's 4 to 6 weeks. So given the calendar, that's most likely going to end his season. I guess maybe there's a slight chance he gets in for the last game or two, but I would say the odds are probably against him in that case. So Joshua Waugh had a decent showing after getting recalled, but seems like the season's going to be ending here. In the Columbus Blue Jackets, recalled forward James Malatesta, who's one of their more intriguing prospects as well. He's recalled on an emergency basis, so I'm not sure. I assume he'll likely get into the lineup and play in their game today. The Ottawa Senators signed one of their higher ranked prospects because their prospect pool is not like it once was. A lot of their top young players are already on the team. The Senators don't have as deep of a prospect pool as they used to. They do have some guys like Crookshank, Ostapchuk, Tyler Clevin, some interesting names that certainly are expected to have a good chance of being long-term Senators, but they're not going to have the high-end impact that like a Brady or a Timmy Stützle or those types of players that they've drafted, or Jake Sanderson has had with them. So they have some good prospects. They just don't have that high end. But this prospect they've signed, Stephen Halliday, looks to be pretty intriguing. I'm going to suggest he's most likely going to be a bottom 6 guy, but I think he could be a really good one. I mean, he comes from Ohio State. He's been drafted for a couple years. He was a 4th-round pick in 2022. Played the last couple of years of college hockey. Because of his age, he gets a 2-year entry-level contract. It'll start next year in 24-25. For the remainder of this year in 23-24, he's been assigned to their American Hockey League affiliate and is going to play on an amateur tryout. So Halliday gets a chance to get a taste of the pro game, and his contract kicks in next year. He's 21 years old. He can play Mostly plays center, which I expect him to be at the pro level. More of a playmaking type center, but he's got great size. He's like 6'3", well over 200 pounds. He's put up 77 points in 78 games over his collegiate career. So to me, he looks like a pretty intriguing prospect. After his second year in college and having another solid campaign, it was rumored and expected he was likely going to come out of school, and the Sens were hoping to get him under contract, which they've now done. So we'll get a small sample here to see what he can do. I don't expect him to get into the Sens lineup at the NHL level next year. I mean, maybe as a recall option, but I would suspect if you look at a guy like Markstrom, for example, who's been their fourth line center for most of the year, he's got similar size, mobility, but he might have a little more upside. Like I don't know if he'll be a Kastelik type. He might be more of a third line guy. I think this guy has enough offense in his game, but we'll have to see if it translates at the NHL level. But an intriguing prospect, and I think the Sens have a good one. I think he can play. I just don't know it's going to be a high-end player, but right now their depth is what's lacking. They have some high-end talent. It's just after the second line, it tends to kind of fall off. They could use some more depth to make that third line stronger and the fourth line too. So we'll see if Halliday can carve himself out some time in Ottawa over the next year or two now that he's out of college and signed. Some rumors that I want to take a look at today. Because 3 players I want to focus on in their futures. There's an article in The Athletic from Penguins beat writers taking a look at Jake Guentzel and whether or not he could actually return to Pittsburgh. They seem to have some optimism, and it's all going to boil down to, for the most part, money. But at the same time, I do honestly wonder, because I don't know, as much as Jake Guentzel's a great player, he's still productive. But like I said before, as much as the Penguins need change, they need to be going through a retool. And yes, Guentzel's a great player, but they already have enough older players locked into longer-term deals or expected to ink Crosby, who's still playing at a very high level. So definitely somebody you don't really care how old he is. You want him on your team and you want him, to sign for term. You don't have any issue there, but, they've got Malkin, they've got Letang. They still have some other guys longer term than you might want into their 30s. And, not all those contracts are going to age well. You got Erik Karlsson, who has some question marks over his future. But, I think a large part of the Guentzel negotiation was obviously the fact that they couldn't come to terms on a contract, but also around the fact that the team just fell out of the playoff hunt. And as much as they're not completely out of it yet, overall you could tell as a team they just weren't good enough. They get a pretty good return for Guentzel. So to bring Guentzel back, I guess, there's no additional cost except for the contract. But I don't know. I think Carolina stands a good chance to keep him. He's done extremely well in a short sample size there. He's putting up close to 2 points per game so far. It's only like 4 games or whatever, but he's done very, very well. And if he continues to play that way down the stretch here and into the playoffs, Carolina's not going to want to give him up. And they're going to certainly try hard to keep him. That much I think we can say with certainty. So does it make sense for him to try to return to Pittsburgh? If he was willing to give them a sweetheart of a deal, maybe, or take less term. But I don't know. I mean, to me, that Penguins team, they don't need to rebuild. They're not going to rebuild as long as Crosby is there. But they need to really do a serious on-the-fly retool. And they need some younger talent. So if they tie up a bunch more money on another long-term deal in Guentzel, that's going to inhibit their ability to get a bunch of young talent to come in. So I don't know. I mean, I guess the main way of justifying it was that his value might have come down. And when they were talking contract before, he might have been wanting more like 9-10 million. But if he's willing to go down to like 8, but it's like, well, if he has a really solid, strong finish to the year and it's a really good playoff and either wins another Stanley Cup or even comes close, like he's going to be able to get that bigger money wherever he wants. So I don't see Pittsburgh ponying up to do that, when it makes more sense for them to try to move off some of these older contracts and try to bring in some younger guys. So as much as I'm sure Penguins fans were sad to see him go, I know Crosby's sad to see him go as well, I personally think there's a good chance he stays in Carolina. But could he return? If he's willing to take a good enough deal and a short enough deal, maybe. I just don't know why he would do that, because based on the market, I don't think he's going to have a hard time getting what he wants at all. This 32 Thoughts podcast, they do talk again further about Jacob Markstrom. Elliot Friedman does think that Craig Conroy is going to, at the very least, want to have a good conversation with Markstrom at the end of the year and kind of show him the plan and direction of the team. I think it's fair to say that Markstrom was pretty frustrated with management and how the whole near trade or almost trade, whatever you want to call it, was handled at the deadline. They came to him, they got him to waive his no trade. The deal didn't go through. So they really were not at a point where they probably should have talked to him. I mean, obviously, they probably didn't want to go to ownership about the salary retention unless they knew for sure he would do it. But I don't know. I mean, the whole thing, I can understand why he was pretty frustrated. But they've traded so many other veterans throughout the course of this season. We've seen Toffoli go before the season even started. And of course, we've seen Zadorov, Tanev, and Hanifin all move on from the blue line. Of course, they're not the only ones either. So this team is definitely, in a different spot. Look at all the vets that have moved off that Flames team since the year started, and I think there's going to be more. I wouldn't be surprised if they moved a guy like Mangiapane. There's some speculation a guy like Kadri might not want to be part of a deeper rebuild and might want to go somewhere else too. And many people think that Markstrom will eventually go. I know Bob McKenzie around the deadline time on the deadline show, he said that he felt that they'd hang on to him for now, but they would find a way to move him in the offseason. There's been all kinds of talk that the Devils are going to continue to pursue him. Yes, they got Jake Allen. Jake's been playing well lately, but that doesn't mean they don't want to add another goalie to work with him as a 1A, 1B type tandem, or even for Jake to be more of a backup. Jake's career has shown that he does better in smaller sample sizes, not necessarily like the three-headed goalie tandem like we saw in Montreal this year. That was a bit much, but when he's in a 1A, 1B or more of a backup role, he's a lot stronger. When he has to be the guy and play all the time, eventually that, in the past at least, has not gone the best over long stretches. He can have short areas like we've seen recently of brilliance, but long term, it suits him better. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if the Devils go after a higher end goalie to pair with him next year. So could Markstrom be on the move? I fully suspect he will, even though Friedman thinks there's a chance Conroy might consider keeping him and talk to him about staying. But they still have Dustin Wolf. They still have Dan Vladar. I don't know. I think it's inevitable, but we'll see. Now, Darren Dreger on the Toronto radio on Overdrive was talking about the future of Leon Draisaitl here recently, talking about the fact that Leon is entering, or will be entering, the final year of his contract. So when July 1st rolls around, the final year begins of Leon's contract, and he would be eligible to sign a contract extension. Well, Darren Dreger got everybody all up in arms talking about how the fact he doesn't think that Leon is going to be in any kind of hurry to sign a contract extension with the Edmonton Oilers. He thinks not only will he not be in a hurry to do it right away, but he thinks it could be drug out a long stretch, and it could be fascinating to watch. Wow, those are some very interesting words. Certainly got a lot of people talking about it. Well, is Leon going to want to stay in Edmonton? And if Leon doesn't want to stay in Edmonton, how is that going to affect Connor McDavid staying in Edmonton? Clearly, Connor has more term in his deal, but still, is it potential that the Oilers could lose both their superstars over time? Well, I think it's a little premature and a little early to kind of sound the alarm on that, but in Leon's case, we're in a better, more recent spot here to talk about his contract since we are there. Whereas McDavid has, like I said, more terms. We're a ways off from that conversation. Now, will the playoffs and the performance at the end of the season play a big role in his decision? Absolutely, I think it will. There's no doubt. If we happen to see the Oilers fumble an opportunity here and lose in the first round again, or maybe even the second round, I think there could be some doubt setting in Draisaitl and McDavid's mind that maybe they're in the best situation to succeed and get that Stanley Cup. You have to wonder. I mean, we heard McDavid and Draisaitl both say that it's cup or bust. Those are some pretty lofty expectations. Now, we've seen them during their tenure there in the last 5-6 years. We've seen them miss the playoffs. We've seen them lose early. We've seen them go a little deeper on a run. There's no doubt they feel like they can win the Stanley Cup. And, if they don't get it done, I understand why they look at it as a lost season or a failure. But at the same time, is Leon going to want to consider other options? We know he's been, like when he first signed that contract at $8.5 million, a lot of people thought it was an overpay. A lot of people criticized the Oilers hardcore for that signing, but that's a bargain deal, and it was not long before it was a bargain deal. He's a perennial 50-goal, 100-point guy. He doesn't have to play with McDavid to put up these numbers either. He can drive his own line, and he's a phenomenal player. So, can you imagine if Leon Draisaitl pushed it and it did drag on and he hit free agency? Like, it would get to the point where he'd have teams lining up to talk to this guy. He would get a phenomenal contract, there's no doubt. But I guess the one thought is if they shows resistance to sign on July 1, depending on how things do go with the Oilers, especially where they're expected to likely have a new GM by then, it could be a very, very difficult situation. Now, Leon Draisaitl, I think, is going to want to consider other options. We know he's been, like when he first signed that contract at $8.5 million, a lot of people thought it was an overpay. A lot of people criticized the Oilers hardcore for that signing, but that's a bargain deal, and it was not long before it was a bargain deal. He's a phenomenal player. So, can you imagine if Leon Draisaitl pushed it and it did drag on and he hit free agency? Like, it would get to the point where he'd have teams lining up to talk to this guy. He would get a phenomenal contract, there's no doubt. But I guess the one thought is if they shows resistance to sign on July 1, depending on how things do go with the Oilers, especially where they're expected to likely have a new GM by then, would they consider moving him if they get the feeling he's not going to want to sign and stay? I would think this summer might be a little premature because he still has a year in his contract, right? So you don't have to make a rash decision, but at the same time, once you get into next year, assuming you're in the mix again for playoffs and you still have you're thinking about, can we win a Stanley Cup this year? You're not going to want to trade him during the season. But at the same time, you don't want to get to a chance where he could walk for nothing. It's a fine line. It's very tricky to do. I don't know. Do you think the Oilers would be concerned enough to the point that they consider to move? I mean, think about the haul they could get for Draisaitl if they did trade him. I mean, they'd lose a lot, yes, and it would be a really hard trade to win considering the quality of player that's in it. But they could get themselves a pretty serious haul. Is there a chance they'd be a better team? I wonder how they would view that. But based on Dreger's comments that he's not going to be in a hurry to sign, could it lead to a departure that we don't see coming? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know what you think down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.